once the road is known. Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone. Follow your dream, though it lead to worlds unknown. Life's but a shadow, once our dreams have flown. What if men cry, your dream is not our own? Your soul knows the answer. Go on alone. Give life your heart, bless everything that's grown. Fear not the loving, all this world's your own. Make rich the soil, but once the seed is sown, seek freedom, don't linger. Go on alone. Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Make rich the soil. I'll say that again. What if men cry? No, what is it actually? Let come who will. But if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone. Go on alone. Go on alone. Go on alone, even if you can't remember the words. So these are all songs by Swami Kriyananda, and they're what he described as sermons in song, which is just another way of sharing truths in a way that kind of goes right to the heart, doesn't it? You know, just hearing this, it just touches you in there somewhere. So this one will touch you even closer because you're going to clap and sing. Actually, no clapping. I just made that up. But you are going to sing.
Right, if you go on a road.
So this half of the room is one half, and this half of the room is the other, okay? This half follows Tandava, this half follows me, and we're going to sing a round, and that round says, give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. So let's just do a couple of rounds just in unison, and then we'll split, okay? Yeah. Give me a light to light. Everybody together. Oh, well, I guess you want to listen first, don't you? Okay, sure. Here we go. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. One more time. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so 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 wise men say. Yes. Well done. You can clap for yourself. Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere. Love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar, it can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Love is a star, though shining afar, it can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Trouble with lullabies right after lunch. So we'll try to bring it upward in meditation instead of downward in sleep. Chanting a little here.
Open wide I
So, does anyone have any immediate thoughts or questions from the practice we just did, or something unclear before we go on from here? You know, people in this country meditate well. I noticed that before. So you're always very still, and there's a naturalness, which is I don't always find if I'm. Anyway, it's good. You have a natural knack. I think it's in the water, as I said earlier. Our theme essentially this afternoon is about the heart, but we can be rather free-form with some of the questions and conversations I had during lunch also. But let me just sort of begin and talk about this just a little bit. Let me try to think how to focus this. Feeling is the motivating force for everything that we do. This is the principle of the balance between male and female. Female, I should say feminine, represents the feeling energy. Masculine represents the reason energy. Men and women come after that. I mean, first in the universe there are these balancing forces. And because the creation is dual, then there's men and women. It's not like women are or men are. These are just forces. The words I like the best are yin and yang, because then you're not caught up in women and men. Yang is the masculine, yin is the feminine side. The masculine side has lots of ideas about what it wants and what it thinks and how it wants to do it. The yin energy is the energy that makes you want to act on those ideas. In the Indian system, they talk about Shakti, and the female is the Shakti that causes the male to act. And you watch it often in human dynamics, that the man will have the idea, but the man will think, we should have a child, we should get a new house, we should move to some other place, and the woman is the one who will make him do it, right? Because the feeling starts moving and the feeling starts making you do it. When you have a feeling about something, you act on it. When you have an idea about something, you may or may not act on it. One of the reasons why, when we were talking earlier about joy and suffering and all of that, one of the reasons that we end up having to suffer in order to grow is that suffering is a very intense feeling. And once we have that very intense feeling, we have an impulse to make changes and have an action. Some of you are straining to see. Don't hesitate to shift your chairs around if you need to. But when we're not feeling well, the desire to get away from that pain causes us to act. Think about it. If everything is fine, would you ever make any changes? And the question is, how fine are things? They might be fine in the sense that they're not miserable, but what is our actual capacity for happiness, and have we reached it? As human beings, we're often really quite willing to settle for something quite mediocre, whereas in fact our soul knows that something much greater is possible. So what we're doing when we are trying to meditate, let me get back to the pain, the suffering for just a minute. Suffering is what causes us to think more deeply about whether or not I'm just going to stay this way or something's going to be different. I recently had to go to a funeral for a whole social group that I'm peripherally connected to, but they're not at all open to these spiritual teachings. And the funeral was for a person who everyone felt had died too soon from a very unusual disease. No one had the slightest context for death. And so it was just a miserable funeral, just miserable. Very wealthy, very socially prominent, very everything that you should be, but then death had just come in and just taken the heart out of the system. And it was agonizing. And there was a great deal that I could have said, but nobody wanted to hear it. So therefore there was no reason to say it. You can't speak if nobody can hear you. All you're doing then is talking to yourself. And people get tired of listening to you if they're not in a vibratory connection. This was Jesus' line, "Cast not your pearls before swine." you don't want to think of the people who aren't listening to you as swine, but what he meant by that was, if people are not on the wavelength of what you have to say, don't do it. Because you're not helping them. Who are you helping if they're not going to listen? So it was an awful experience until I realized, oh yeah, this is the kind of suffering that causes people to think more deeply. And then you begin to think more deeply. And then you find other solutions than just money and social position and a beautiful home and all those things. And what you discover, you see on the other side of that, is a satisfaction that mere externals can't give you. That was what I was talking about this morning. It's about your consciousness. So when we meditate, we might have the idea that it's a good idea to meditate. But unless we are drawn to do it from something that comes out of the heart, we won't. And also, unless we can bring into our practice something that comes from the heart, it's also actually rather boring. I mean, hong, saw is not even a pretty sound. And you just sort of sit there and do it, and after a while you really must think, what am I doing here? You know, the Sanskrit has an actual vibratory power, which is why we try to have you stay with the Sanskrit. The I am spirit is the meaning of it. I had a friend who used to work with juvenile delinquents. I'm sure that's a politically incorrect phrase now. There must be a better one. Youth at risk, that's what we call them. Except these are the ones who are already half incarcerated. But anyway, he worked with them. And he thought it would be terrific if they met me and learned something of what we had to learn. So he brought a little busload of youth at risk to have me teach them to meditate. Whoa, how about that, okay? So I didn't really think that we could push this all the way to Hong Saw. I thought we're going to go far enough just trying to get them to meditate. So it's fascinating for me to try to just make this up again for a whole different population. I mean, first of all, these kids were, court mandated that they go around with this guy and that they come to me. So nobody was there by free choice. They were all there because they had to be. And so I'm teaching them about watching the breath, and I'm trying to get them to get some affirmation, is how I put it, rather than a mantra, that what would lift their spirits that they could repeat. So I said, so we want something that really makes you feel happy when you say it. So one of the men raises his hand and he says, sex, girls, sex, girls, like this. And I thought he was brave, he was putting himself out there. And I'm thinking as fast as I can think. And I said, that's great, but what if you're not having any sex and no girl likes you? What do you do then? Because then you're just affirming what you don't have, right? And he admitted that that was a problem. So we need something that is independent of the way the world responds to you. And what we came up with was very simple. I am peace. And in the world that these people lived in, peace was not that easy to come by, and just even to find that. So we actually then had a very good session. And just to finish the story, my friend made them all write me thank you notes. He was training them to be gracious people. And I got, some of them were just the usual, but I got two that were really quite something. One of them was, I was at home and my father got drunk, and he came raging home and started, beating up on my mom. And I started just doing this mantra, this meditation. And he said, and it just enabled me to go through that in a way that I've never been able to do before. And the other one, we talked about being on the bus, and there were bullies on the bus, and him just, pulling himself back and then just starting to do this practice, and what a difference it made in their lives. Because suddenly they had a way to get a grip on their own consciousness, and they just didn't have to be subject to that world around them. Now, that's motivation, right? Because there's something in your life that you really don't want to have to experience in that way. Because some of you have asked me a question in various ways about suffering precluding these practices. But you see, suffering is what drives us to these practices. And of course, when you're alone with yourself, whatever is paining you is going to pain you. But is there an alternative to it? So that becomes to the question, are we part of a greater reality, or is what we see all there is? And that's where feeling comes from. And it can start just as a hope. You know, a scientist, when he starts his experiment, he believes his hypothesis, but he hasn't proved it yet. But he has enough faith in it that he's going to put out the energy to find out if the experiment is true. One of the things that Yogananda really emphasizes in all his teachings is what he calls the science of religion. And that isn't just, what that means is proven by experiment. That's the scientific method that he's talking about. But you start with the fact that I have a hypothesis that is worth my putting the energy into. The story is told that Thomas Edison believed there was a filament that could hold the electric power that could create the light. I believe he experimented with 20,000 different forms of that until he found the one that worked. And everyone around him was ready to quit. But he just knew. He knew it was there. And he knew if he just continued, he would find it. Now, that's faith. Or that's belief. He believed it was true, and then it was proved true, and then he had absolute faith. And that's what we're all working with. We have to believe it enough to try it, but we have to persist long enough until that belief becomes faith. Now, self-evidently in my life, I've persisted long enough. And I persisted long enough for a really simple reason. I was miserable. I was a cheerful, miserable person. I was a very odd person. I was very cheerful by nature. I just am. I have a light disposition. But underneath that cheerfulness, I was absolutely desperate. Just desperate. That's the only word I can use. I didn't become upset because it seemed impractical to me to become upset. I actually thought about having a nervous breakdown at one point, just before I really began to find these teachings. I just considered it. Because I believe in past lives I've had many nervous breakdowns, actually, past incarnations. It's like something I know. I sort of know that when the life gets to be too much, you just go somewhere else. That's a simple solution. You just move over from reality. But this time, when I thought about doing it, I thought, literally, I thought this through. I was standing looking out the window, and I thought I could either become a drug addict and just completely blot out my consciousness, or I could just flip out into some lunatic land, which is, excuse me, that's probably also politically incorrect, but I have a very relaxed feeling about mental illness. It's just something we do sometimes. So anyway, I go over there, and I thought, and then I'll have a breakdown, and then they'll have to take me away, and then I'll go into some sanitarium for a while, and I'll be there for a long time, and then I'll get better, and then I'll come out, and then I'll be standing looking out this window, and I will have accomplished nothing. I'll just be standing here wondering if there's any meaning to this life. And it was that inner drive, because you see, we attract things in our lives. It's all an energy universe. So the vibrations we're putting out affect the vibrations. The book comes into your hand, the person comes into your hand, somebody speaks to you and you hear them. And you may then realize, oh, somebody said this to me a long time ago. When I first read Autobiography of a Yogi, I didn't really like it. I didn't read very much of it. It just seemed kind of just too far out for me. Then I met Swami Kriyananda, who was devoted to Yogananda, and I picked up the book again, and it just made perfect sense to me. I couldn't figure out why I didn't like it. But hadn't heard it the first time. But we have to have this feeling inside of us, and then we have to sit and meditate with that feeling. And here's a key, if you can find it, which is a lot of times when people are teaching you to meditate, they call it meditation because in the West we don't have a long-established tradition like what they do in the East. So we can just make it up. Anybody can just call it, they can call anything whatever they want to call it. They can call themselves enlightened, they can call themselves in cosmic consciousness, they can call themselves whatever they want to, and we don't really know the difference. Somebody said once, it's like if you believed every used car salesman who told you that this was the best car that there is, people can just declare. But these are inherent realities. This is science. We are made a certain way. You know, I referred to kundalinis and chakras and spiritual eye and all of these things. These are verifiable facts. You can't just make up that, you know, we breathe through our knees. We don't breathe through our knees. We breathe through our lungs. And the spiritual path is just as exact. And so what I was going to say, some people teach you to meditate in a way which is useful, but it's merely relaxing downward is the word I want to use. Where you let go of your tension, but you let go of your tension by kind of moving yourself into a semi-dream world. And sometimes that's not a bad thing. Close your eyes and visualize a great field, and then you walk across the field and a white unicorn comes across and you climb on the back of the white unicorn and then you fly into the cosmos, and that's all. I mean, that's marvelous. And it's great fun. But there is no white unicorn and you're not actually flying. You're just using your imagination. Imagination is helpful. When you're actually meditating, you're actually moving your consciousness into a realm that's actually there, which is very, very different. And what you're moving into is not something that you've used your imagination to create so that you'll like soothe yourself like a child. One of my earliest memories is the look, the taste, and the smell of the pink teddy bear with the rubber nose that I used to chew every night when I would go to sleep. I mean, I can still just remember cuddling up to that bear and chewing on his nose. I mean, how big was I, you know, like this. And that was how I made myself, I guess they call it soothed myself as a little baby. I deeply remember that teddy bear, but the teddy bear wasn't giving me anything. The teddy bear was just an inert object. It wasn't actually comforting me. But I had gotten myself in the habit of feeling comforted by it. Okay. By contrast, when you actually can move your consciousness into that realm where peace is the vibration, or where joy is the vibration, or expansiveness or freedom, and you experience that, that's not your imagination, that's actually you have expanded into another realm. And then even if you lose it, you know, even if you lose connection with it, it always remains a part of you. You see the difference? We have 3 levels of consciousness. Subconscious is when we retreat into our own reality. That's what we do when we go to sleep. You know, we're sound asleep. You can have vivid dreams. I slept 10 hours last night after the overnight flight from California, and I was really active all night. I don't know why. Maybe I was sleeping in a new room or whatever what it was. I was really busy. I was just doing stuff all night long. I can't quite remember what it was, and I wasn't in cosmic consciousness. I was just busy. But even if I had been dreaming about all the people that I'm meeting here, none of you were really there. It was all just my imagination. And mental illness is retreating into a subconscious world where it's just your world. You don't meet anybody there. And also your subconscious mind is just a collection of everything that you've already done. You just, all your past, all the memories of this life, and actually all the memories of all previous incarnations, it's everything that's brought you to this point. It's not creative and it's not going forward. Sometimes it reorganizes things and tells you stuff you didn't know. I'm not saying it's useless, but it's confining. Conscious level is where we all live now, where it's a greater shared reality. That's what we're sharing, a reality now. If we all went outside this room and compared notes, we would recognize that we'd all been in the same place. Whereas if I talked to you about my dream, you wouldn't know anything about it. Superconscious is really literally like we're an inverted pyramid. And the point we are now is the most contracted point. And in fact, our consciousness goes out like this. You can think of it like the fingers of a hand. If I put it like this is where we live. But when we go to here, we discover that all our separateness merges in this great whole like this. And true meditation is when we go upward into superconscious. And when we go upward into superconscious, we suddenly are still this limited self, but we're also all the source of where that comes from. And in the tradition of India, there are 8 realities, the 8 manifestations of the spirit: love, joy, peace, calmness, energy, light, sound, and wisdom. And those are the classics: love, peace, calmness, joy, light, sound, energy, wisdom. And so when we go to meditate, we begin to find those qualities. And then, you see, the feeling of the heart really gets involved. Because what is it that we want? If you think about those 8 qualities, that's what we're always seeking. I mean, there's permutations on them, but that's the core value. Why do we seek relationships? Why do we seek success in life? Why do we seek education? Why do we seek an atmosphere in which we feel nurtured, in which we can live? Because we want those qualities. And the great secret that we discover when we suffer is that we get driven inside and we find out that they're already in us. So one of the secrets of successful meditation is to, and this is where imagination does play a part, is that you meditate with the belief that I can move into this reality. And we become receptive in our meditation. You use your willpower in this peculiar way. You use your willpower to hold yourself perfectly still so you can align yourself with the vibration that you're trying to merge into. This is an energy universe. And this is a scientific fact. Everything is energy, but we don't fall through the floor, do we? Because we're all vibrating at different levels. And we don't actually merge with each other's consciousness because we're all vibrating at different levels. But if any one of these masters, or even Swami Kriyananda, walked into this room, he would perceive something different in this room. He would feel something different. He would be standing right here with us, but he would feel something different because his vibration is different. I mean, think of it like this. If we had radios in here, radios are becoming like really passé, so I don't really know exactly what I want to say. Pretty soon I'm going to start speaking of radios, and the children are going to say, what? What? You know, it's embarrassing to become quaint, but it's beginning to happen. Okay. But if you had a radio, we still have them in our cars. If we had a radio and we turned it on, we would realize as we shifted that station, all those programs are right in this room. I mean, it's really, we don't think about it because we're so used to it. But we could turn on a radio, we could hear sports, and then we could hear sports. Then we could hear sports. Then we could hear news, traffic, and in America you would hear money. You would hear a lot about money. I don't know if they talk about money in New Zealand as much as they do in America all the time. Money, 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 money. And you could just, pardon me, in politics. Oh, I forgot about politics. You could just move that dial and you would discover that each one of those was an option, depending on what you tuned into. Love, peace, joy, calmness, wisdom, energy, light, sound. It's an option depending on what you're tuned into. And now this is where it gets a little tricky, and what you prefer to experience. Now see, this is where a subconscious mind becomes kind of a detriment. Because what we are habituated to experience has a certain grip on us. If you think about your consciousness as just kind of like this light, free-floating thing, and all of our habits are like these vortices of magnetism, and so all of a sudden I'm going to experience love and joy and peace, and then you've got this whirling vortex of anger and misery, or overwrought concern, and your little bubble is like the just gets eaten just like that. Isn't that what it feels like? You're just hung saw, and then all of a sudden it's completely something else. And you realize that you don't really know how long you've been finishing that argument or whatever it is, because your consciousness has been grabbed and eaten by, and that's karma. That's a whole very esoteric, extremely interesting subject about how all that works. But everything that you've been habituated to doing until now creates a vortex of energy like that. Just think of it like a whirlpool. And when you try to extract your concentration from that, it keeps getting sucked back down into it. And that's why, you know, everybody tells you how great meditation is, and you sit down to do it, and it isn't, right? I was in a taxi cab in Chicago, and the short answer when people ask me what I do is I say I teach meditation. That's the short answer. I don't really want to tell them the whole story most of the time. Sometimes I don't even say that. But I'm in the taxi cab, and the guy says, basically starts chatting with me. What do you do? And I said, well, I teach meditation. I'm giving some classes here. The Chicago taxi driver says, yeah, I tried meditation. Didn't work. I said, oh, what did you do? I went into a dark room and I sat there. It was awful. I said, Well, there's a little more to it. You might benefit from a little instruction. And then we talked politics. No, it's just like, but that's exactly what happened. He went in with all this expectation, and then his habitual vortex of energy simply grabbed him, and he was just himself. That's the seed growing into the apple tree. You have to create a new vortex. And the thing that is so fascinating to realize about us, we are nothing but a pattern of energy. This is a scientific fact. We are nothing but a pattern of energy. And you change your pattern of energy, you change everything. The only difference between a saint and a sinner, as Yogananda said, is the way they behave. I mean, it's really funny when you first say it, but it's really true. It's not like they have different anything. It's just the way they behave. And the way they behave is based on all of the patterns, what they think will give them happiness and what they think will cause them pain. So when we're meditating, we have to create a new vortex. And the most powerful way, what is the most powerful force in the world? Love and desire, isn't that so? And I don't mean sexual desire, I just mean desire. When you have, I've never had children, but every mother tells me, I mean, you don't have to try to love your baby. You just can't get your mind off your baby. You just can't think of anything else. Or you meet some new man or woman who just seems like really everything you've been waiting for, you just can't get your mind off of that person. Or if you're doing some artistic work or whatever it is that you love, you don't have to try. It just goes automatically, doesn't it? Love is this powerful force. And so what we have to develop in our meditation practice is we have to love something. We can love, and this is where the masters come in very nicely. An image of a guardian angel, the light, something that is very, very attractive to you. That's what gets the heart involved. And that you believe in enough. You don't have to believe in it a lot, and it doesn't make any difference whether somebody else believes in it. You have to believe in it. You have to believe in the possibility of, or you have to have a deep desire for. Many people have a very strong relationship with the concept of truth. And, you don't have to be a airy-fairy kind of feeling person. Truth is a very impersonal yang ideal. That's the wisdom aspect of it, you see. That wisdom is also an aspect of spirit. What is true? Who am I? How can I? And power, I use the word energy, but power is also an aspect of the divine. One may deeply believe and wish to have that power within yourself. I mean, ideally, in order to use it for good. But power is also something that you have a feeling for and you want to go toward. And then I was saying we have to create a new vortex. And we were doing a little bit of the chanting. And there are many other practices like that. And what the chanting does, and it did it for all of us in this room. The room got more and more still. And when you have a melody as well as an affirmation, it bypasses many of the resisting factors in the brain. Music goes into different receptors than mere words do. So you can have an affirmation, but you put that affirmation on melody, and all of a sudden you have changed your vibration. And what you also have to understand, and this is where, see, metaphysics is really interesting. You can say all of this stuff metaphysically, and it's just an objective reality. Then you look at all the devotional expressions, and you realize that they're all devotional expressions of the same metaphysics. And the reality of it is that we're like little drops of water seeking to go back to the ocean. It's metaphysically, it's inherent within us. We have this compelling desire to move forward and to expand. As one of my early mentors said to me when I was quite young, you may think you just want to lie down and die. Try it. It's not so easy. She said, after a while, if nothing else, you get hungry or you have to go to the bathroom. In other words, we don't want to die. And even, that just desire to survive, even when life doesn't look like it's much worth living, there's this push. It's within us. And that's when we really start asking the deep question, who am I? We want to be loved. We want joy. What do we want? Love, peace, calmness, joy, wisdom, the infinite light, the vibration of Om. We're driven to it. And sooner or later, no matter how many incarnations, no matter how many nervous breakdowns you have, really, in the end, you're standing there looking out the window, wondering what life is about and how you're going to get there. Because we don't enjoy suffering. We want it to stop. Okay? So we do things that begin to align us with that vibration. And what I was starting to say about the metaphysics of it. And then there's another power that you will experience that is consciously pulling you. And whether you want to call that your own self being driven, or whether you want to call it God loving you, trying to bring you back to himself, I love all those kinds of words. When I first came to Ananda village in 1969, I guess it was, 1970, the summer of 1970, Yogananda often talked about God in the feminine. He would talk about Divine Mother. One of the messages he brought was that spirituality has become too yang, and what we need now is much more compassion. And the feminine represents unconditional love. The Father represents also love, but also, it's a little more impersonal. You have to meet the standard. The Divine Mother forgives you no matter what. And what we're needing now, because we've become so estranged from the concept of God, is we need that compassion. All masters taught it. Jesus called it the Holy Ghost. He called it the Comforter. That was just the most brilliant wordsmithing ever. He called it the Comforter. After I am gone, I will send you the Comforter. A little child, this is a joke, a little child came home from Sunday school and said, Mommy, Mommy, don't worry. My Sunday school teacher said that the quilt is coming. Mother took it, then went and called the Sunday school teacher. They'd been learning about the Comforter. God will send the Comforter. But what was Jesus saying to us is that God will comfort us. That's the Divine Mother. So at Ananda, people would talk about the Divine Mother, and I went up there for the first time. I'd already met Swami, but I was very austere. I was extremely austere, very, very austere. I was very thin. I had these glasses like this, and I wore my long hair in these tight little braids. And I was very austere. And I was a food fanatic and everything. I was very austere. So I heard this man, young man, he had, Ananda was very primitive in those days, as I mentioned, and he had set up a little jewelry business. He took wild flowers and things in the area, and he carved the natural wood, and he put rosin in them and made this little jewelry business. It was actually pretty nice. And his little laboratory was this abandoned bread truck that somehow was on the property. So he'd set up this whole business inside the bread truck, and then somebody else thought the bread truck was an eyesore, so they hauled it to the dump and pushed it into the dump. So his whole business went into the dump. So he's having a conversation with another person, and he's saying, I thought Mother wanted me to do the jewelry business, but then Mother took the little laboratory and pushed it into the dump, so I guess Mother doesn't want me to do this. My thought is, this guy is awfully old just to be doing what his mother wants him to do. Then the next thing I heard was that he was actually talking about Divine Mother, which actually, from my point of view, made it worse. I mean, it was just I have to say, it was the wackiest thing I'd ever heard. What is this? Especially a mother who participates on that level, like what are they talking about? I just saw that like that. These are reflections later. Then 5 or 6 years later, after I myself am deeply in this teaching, somebody talks to me about some problem they have. I say, just trust Divine Mother. She'll take care of you. Just give the problem to Divine Mother and then you'll see it'll work out. And I heard myself saying that, and I thought, where did this come from? Because I remembered how just nuts that had been to me. But where it had come from was experience. Just nothing but experience, which is pushing myself time after time to really understand the nature of that greater reality. And I had begun to experience this divine compassion. That's the only word I can think of. The Comforter. So that it was no longer, I was just like Edison. At first it was just a weird theory, but somehow I pushed myself enough, and then it became my own. And I wasn't quoting anymore. I just knew that there was a greater reality that would comfort me. And that's what we have to do. We have to somehow keep trying. And this is where the chanting and the music comes in, where you create a vortex, and then you slip into that vortex. You know, you repeat the mantra, and then you slip into that vortex. You do the practices the way they're given to you, because they're given to you by people who know that they work, and then you slip into that vortex. Because without that, you can't continue. Because you become either bored or it's just too dry. But, all right, let's see what we should, oh my goodness, I went much longer than I meant to. Let's take a brief break, and let's everybody go out and have tea and coffee, and then we'll come back and finish. Okay. What does your T-shirt say? Yenabo? What does that mean? Does it mean anything?
You don't know?
Oh, it's Kiwi slang? Oh, I see. Is that Kiwi slang? Yeah.
I'm indifferent. I don't know what.
I see. Fair enough. But it's oxymoronic to declare on your T-shirt that you're indifferent, isn't it? You're supposed to commit yourself. You're undecided. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. All right, all. Do we have crowds outside still? Okay, thank you. You have the world at your feet, don't you, Helen? Yeah, I said you have the world at your feet. It's fun. Those are the shoes for travel, for sure. Okay. We've had a bit of an attrition here, but we're still mostly here. Okay, great souls. I wanted to just say a few other things before we go back to what we're mainly doing here. This is the first day we're in this country for 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks, I guess. 2 weeks and 3 weekends. There, I've got it right. And all of it is in Hamilton except for the last weekend where we're going to Lake Taupo for a retreat. There's still room if you would like to come to Lake Taupo, where we had a really great time a few months ago, and I'm sure we'll have another lovely time. You can really immerse yourself in what we're doing, and we have a lot more informal time. It's just marvelous. And then there's a whole program, starting today, going through these next 2 weeks and next weekend. Some of it is here, and some of it is at the Narrows Retreat where we had lunch. And it's all just sort of following the same theme. I mean, you've had a good, honest taste of what the rest of everything will be. So it's going to be, if you enjoyed this, you'll probably like the rest of it. And we'll be able, the more time we spend together, the more we'll be able to get deeper into what we're doing, and you'll have the opportunity not only to talk to me, but to the other 3 Americans who are traveling, and with Kavita and others who have been in this work a little bit longer than some of you. So please do join us. Everything has a small price on it, but if money is an obstacle, we've come a long distance and we really just want to spend time with you. So don't let that deter you. If your interest is high and your wallet is skinny, then I read this man who was a jockey, and this was a true story. He was a jockey, a very successful jockey. So he was a very small man, and he always had a beautiful woman on his arm. It's often very statuesque, beautiful women. And he said, "I'm taller when I stand on my wallet." Anyway, if your wallet is thin, do come. Also, we have a little free literature table over there, and a couple of things particularly I wanted to point out to you. There's a piece of paper which lists all the online resources. Ananda is a global effort, and Atmajyoti is showing us the piece of paper there. Ananda has an enormous online presence, and everything that you may want to know about these teachings is accessible online, including lots of classes and also our web, our primary website, which is just ananda.org. I think it has like 10,000 pages, and full books can be downloaded. You can spend too much of your time just on that website. And also, I myself have a YouTube channel, plus I have a whole, she's holding up the YouTube channel thing back there. There are now, I'm embarrassed to say, about 600 videos on that YouTube channel. I talk a lot. And that doesn't even count all the audios that are on a different site before there was video. And we film pretty much everything I do because this is an amazing age. You have 50 people in a room, and then 2 years later you have 500 people who've looked at it. So if you've enjoyed it, within a few days, I think Tandava will have it posted, and you can. Plus, anything that I've mentioned, you know, all the karma, reincarnation, chakras, everything that you'll find, lots of classes on those. And a lot of the books that are in the back, Kriyananda's books, I've done study courses on those books. I've been doing this a long time. But it's very helpful because you can noodle around at your own pace and find what you want. Okay? And I think that's it. Is there anything that I've forgotten, Kavita?
Yes, tomorrow morning.
Oh, yes, thank you. Tomorrow morning, we have a Sunday morning gathering that we've all been doing for a long, long time. And it's a Sunday service, but it's not religion like you're used to seeing it, but it looks a little more like religion. So, but it's a very enjoyable, we chant, we meditate together, we speak. There's a different feeling to it, that's the only thing I can say. We have a little ritual that we do called the purification ceremony, where you have an opportunity to open yourself to the presence of these masters. Bear in mind, I mean, you may in fact end up wanting to make an actual relationship with this line of teachers. But the main point is there's power here. And you open yourself to that power, and it will take you where you're supposed to go. This is not a contest to see how many disciples we can all get. This is, as Swami Kriyananda used to say, we're trying to convert you to yourself. And that's all that's trying to happen here. So it's a different feeling. It's a celebration and a worship service. And then on Monday, because it's a holiday, we're doing another day that's similar to this one. But we wing it, as you may have noticed. So everything that we do is just dependent on what the energy in the room is. So you won't find the same experience twice. It'll always be different. And your presence will change it, meaning you come with your energy and whatever it is that you're needing, and that is what dictates it. I stand between the masters and you, and as my dear friend used to pray, she would say, before she would give any program, you don't have a mouth and I don't have a brain, so let's work together on this, okay? But what actually happens, truthfully, is that your vibrations are asking for something, and then it just comes out that way. And so it's very interesting to me. That's why I've been able to do this for so many years and not die of boredom. Because every single time is completely different. Because it's a completely different group of people, and even if it's the same group of people, it's tomorrow. And everybody's different than they were yesterday. So we always have a lot of fun together. And the more we get to know each other, the easier it gets to be. That's my little sales pitch for, please, come back. Okay? So, I can babble on, or I can stop and ask if there's any questions or any particular way you'd like me to focus this last half hour or so. From the things that I've already said, what might be helpful to you? Nambara?
I just wondered the questions that were passed in.
Right.
Are you going to answer all those, and if so, when?
There's nothing in the. I've answered a number of them. I've answered a number of them in the course of what I've been saying.
Thanks.
So I don't think. You know, the question of suffering precluding the ability to meditate is interesting to me, how often it's asked. This seems like a pretty happy country. Okay, but no, I think I've touched the main ones here. Okay. Yeah, so here we go. Helen? Excuse me, Tracy.
Mentioned, about, when you start to meditate, you become aware of your state of consciousness.
Right.
How do we work with that to move through it?
How do we move through it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. The very act of meditation in itself begins to change your consciousness. Now, it's not like meditation is magic, and that's why sometimes people, like the taxi driver, I tried it, didn't work. But years ago, many years ago, when it was the very first lecture tour I took in America, and I had a slideshow, that's how long ago it was. I had a slideshow of our community. And, it was a beautiful slideshow. We made the best of what we had. And I showed that. It was a 6-week trip. And I showed that, many, many times. And people would say to me over and over again, it looks so beautiful there, and what you're doing looks so great, but how does that work in the real world? That's what people would say. Because we still live in, that community is still in the same place, but it was way isolated then. No internet, no email, no telephones even. It was way out there. And I answered that question seriously for 6 weeks. And right toward the end, I guess I was just tired. I got fed up. And I realized, I said, the real world is actually the world we're living in that isolated rural place. Because the way everybody lives is they're constantly distracting themselves. And you're just living in this plethora of stimulus. And every time anything feels at all uncomfortable, we go out and do something about it, don't we? We go to the television, we get a movie, we go back to our devices, to our computers. I'm not, is Luddite the word? I'm not one of those people who's against all these things. But they just have to be used sensibly. But you just watch it. You feel the slightest discomfort in your consciousness, and you go out and find a solution that's outside yourself, don't you? You open the refrigerator, you call a friend, you go on Facebook to see if anything's happened in the last 15 minutes. Just whatever it might be. But it's always, I feel an inner disturbance, I will find an outer solution. And all you do is postpone the observation or the correction of that inner disturbance. In the life, especially the life we were living at that time, it was so barren. And we were far from town, and we didn't have cars, most of us, because we couldn't afford them. It was very fun. So we always had to deal with inner realities on the inner plane, because we just didn't have the option to do anything else. Now, which is the more real world? And so what you're having to work with, and then now I've lived almost 30 years in Palo Alto, so believe me, I don't live that way at all anymore. I live within a community, but it's 5 acres, and you just drive off the property. We have a beautiful temple, and it's very different. I'm surrounded by wonderful people, but it's right in the middle of this incredibly materialistic, incredibly energetic, incredibly intense, and increasingly densely populated place. But inwardly, when you go, this is where everything emanates from. So just the mere effort to just be, even for a short period of time, at the source instead of at the periphery, it's like it brings everything back to a focus. The mere possibility that you can bring everything back to its point of origin, just even as an idea, begins to completely change the way you relate to everything else. Because it begins to occur to you, first of all, hey, I'm in charge of this experience. And if I get just the slightest bit of skill about how to bring myself back to the center point, then all of a sudden I'm not subject to this world. And so even if you're still swinging most of the time, just the effort to bring it to a still point slows it down. And it's very interesting. The effect of your meditation is not just the experience of the meditation. It's the fact that you're making any effort at all to bring it back to its point of origin. And it changes your vibration. It changes you metaphysically in the chakras. Because all of the chakras are ruled by this one. And if we never put any energy toward this one, then all those chakras just play against each other all the time. And the fire chakra, you know, sucks down the air chakra and pulls up the water chakra and whatever it is, but they're all just like this. But when you put any energy here, this is why we teach you to meditate here, then everything begins to line up, because this is the point at which the ego, which is here, the ego begins to align with the spirit. And then everything else falls into alignment with the spirit, with the higher part of yourself. So even if your meditation is lousy, in and of itself, the fact that you made an effort, you see that's a huge difference from just letting it swing to even just trying to pull on it, even just a little bit. It's like, I think of it like if you're, I grew up in Texas, and we used to ride horses. And sometimes the horse would get the bit in his teeth, and he would just run away, you know, because the ability to run the horse is because of the way the bit feels in his mouth, and that smart horse figures he can clamp his teeth down on it, then you can't influence him. And so the horse is running away with you, which never actually happened to me, but I understood it. And you eventually can get control back. But when you first start pulling, the horse is in charge. So when you're trying to get control of your mind and your consciousness, when you first start pulling, it doesn't respond to you because it's got the bit in its teeth and it's had it there for a long time. But your success comes from beginning. And if you just persevere, then you find it. And what happens is very strange. You may think you're getting nowhere, but then something will happen in your life, and the fact that you now understand that there's an inner reality will cause you to react completely differently. And it'll surprise you. It'll kind of knock you over. Whoa, look at that. I would have gotten so upset. Or where did that idea come from? Or how did I know what to say at that point? Because you've begun to realign your chakras. So basically, you need to try to meditate. You don't even have to do it well. And you have to not quit. Yeah. And you have to believe it. I mean, believe it enough to try it, or be miserable enough to try it. One or the other. Yes.
Is there a certain time on the day while you should go for meditation?
Okay.
Or evening, or
I'm going to encourage you to consider Kavita's 4-week course, in which many, many things will be worked out. Plus, by coming back to a course every week, you kind of develop a little more of a habit, and you can have experience and ask. So I'll give you a very fast answer, which is simply anytime you will meditate is the best time to meditate. After that, it's very nice to have your meditation be in some close relationship to when you go into subconsciousness, which is sleep. Because of things I won't go into in great detail, but the superconscious can influence the subconscious. It's very nice to meditate when you first wake up in the morning. It's very nice to meditate the last thing before you go to bed. However, sometimes people are not awake enough when they first wake up and they're too sleepy last thing. There's also times in the universe, which are balance points: dawn, dusk, midnight, noon. But the best time to meditate is when you will meditate. Having said all of that, it's very, very simple. Okay? So, now, you had a question, Tracy.
Well, it's not really a question. I don't really know what it is. But when I think about Paramahansa Yogananda, I think about, I'm not sure if I've got the word exactly right, Prabhupada, how he came over from...
Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada?
Yeah, for the Hare Krishna.
The Hare Krishna guy.
He came over around, he did a similar thing, didn't he?
Yeah, he came to America. He lived in San Francisco.
And struggled and...
Yeah, I mean, it was
Did
a...
they ever meet? Or was it around the same time period? Or?
I don't think that Yogananda and Prabhupada met, but Kriyananda and Prabhupada met. The Hare Krishna movement, you know, the worldwide Hare Krishna movement, where he told everyone, if you just chant what they call the Mahamudra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And he just got everybody out there doing it. Yeah, I was in San Francisco then. I remember it big time. Yeah, I know I never did it. This has been my path my whole life. But he was an Indian man, and he came
Did you meet him?
because I found my path so early and just followed it. I never really shopped around. I mean, I was living in the candy store, but I had my big box right in front of me, and so I didn't need anything else. It was a fun era. I was glad to be part of it. So,
When is a good time to teach children? meditation?
Well, every parent wants to teach their children. Most children, okay,
I mean, what is a good age?
when they're interested. But you can't, most children, it's a really exceptional child who can actually sit and meditate. You can help children to become spiritual in many different ways. There's a book back there called Education for Life. We run schools. Anand has founded schools. Making schools for children is a huge part of what we do. But we do teach them, to meditate when they're of the right age. But we don't define spirituality by meditation, because with children that's just not realistic. But most children are naturally spiritual in this sense, in the true sense. Most children know that they are part of a greater reality. And most children, depends on their karma, have a just kind of natural attunement with love and with joy and creativity, and they're extremely interested in life, and they're generally optimistic, and then we send them to school. And we gradually teach them that they were wrong. And we have gotten to the point, because our school where we are, I helped start it, it's now 22 years we've had it. If the children are not suffering, how could they possibly be learning? I say to the parents, how well do you learn when you're suffering? When you are frightened and uncomfortable, how receptive are you? It's lunacy. So the fundamental principle of our school is very simple, which is that we confirm what they already know, and we help them to stay connected to their inner self. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that's basically it. And then, of course, you teach them to be centered, you teach them to listen, you teach them to quiet down. I'll tell you one story about that before I go into other things. One of our little boys, he's about 6. He was with his mother on an airplane, and there was an enormous amount of turbulence. And it was really scary turbulence. The mother told us this story afterwards, really scary turbulence. A lot of the children began to scream, and cry because it was so, and everybody was really scared. And so she leaned over to her little boy and said, why don't you do what they teach you in school to calm down? And so he just folded his legs up, and he went completely calm. And he was breathing. We teach them to breathe. He was breathing, and he was just calm, and he just rode through the whole thing without a murmur. The mother comes to us and says, would you teach me what you taught my son? And it was just how he responded, because he'd just been taught to. Now, that's everything. Dogma means nothing. What you really want is for people to know what to do. Last time when I came, those of you who were here, Brian McSweeney traveled with me, and Brian was born in our community and graduated through our schools. And his comment when he left and went into high school, because we didn't go through high school, he said he was just so much more aware than the people around him. That's how he put it. He was just aware of so much more than all the other children, his friends. They were fine people, but he just had more consciousness. And he had enough consciousness to do really well and be friends with them, but he was just conscious of what they didn't know that he knew, because he'd been brought up with. He never lost it. We don't. Children are below the age of consent, so you can't. We don't have the belief that if you just baptize them, they're saved. You have to participate in the change of consciousness, so you have to work with children very differently. Yeah. Okay. Is there more before we go in another way? Okay, let me just try to think for a moment. There's one, I'm not sure I actually said this, but I want to, so let me just try to get this one point across. One of the really, one of the confusions in meditation is the idea that people think that you're meditating by yourself. Let me just think how to say that. The real secret of success in meditation is that you realize that you're entering into a relationship. That was the word I wanted to use. I said that earlier when I talked about the fact that you're tuning into something that's actually there. But what you really have to understand is that everything that applies to any friendship that you have applies to your meditation practice. You need to be regular, you need to be attentive, you need to be receptive, you need to be open to new ideas, you need to listen, you need to be loving, and you also need to believe in the love that's being offered to you. You know, when you have a friendship with someone and you don't believe in that person's friendship for you, how does that relationship go as a rule? It doesn't go real well, does it? And also, even when you sit to meditate, however you want to articulate it to yourself, I mean, prayer is the obvious way to do it, and that's what prayer is. But I always say when I'm talking about teaching children, we have a Christmas service, and I tell people it's Jesus' birthday. And we're having a birthday party here, and on a birthday, you do what the birthday child wants to do. And so you do the things that Jesus thinks are fun, which is prayer and chanting and things like that. But when you first go into somebody's birthday party, you have to greet them, don't you? It would be very rude just to come into the party and take all the cake without ever speaking to the birthday person. Isn't that so? And so when we sit to meditate, we have to realize that we're coming into the presence of. And I was saying earlier, maybe that presence is truth, maybe whatever it is, light. You can make it very impersonal. But you're coming into the presence of. And part of the way you magnetize your own practice is you really make a relationship with whatever that vibration is. And so prayer is the obvious way to do it. Chanting is the way to do it. When we conduct our services, we pray to all the masters. We speak the name of every master. We invoke the presence of the master. And we declare our receptivity to what's coming to us. You know, a lot of, when Kavita was talking about walking meditation, she was talking about the way intuition can play in meditation. Because what we're doing when we're being intuitive is we're going to the source of understanding. That's why you can have intuitions about things that you don't have reasons for. You have the intuition first and then the reasons come after. Now don't misunderstand. Merely because it's unreasonable does not mean it's intuitive. Sometimes it's just unreasonable. But sometimes intuition can come first and the reason for it is revealed later. But even if what you're looking for is higher guidance or intuition or your own superconscious, you need to start by understanding that you're forming a relationship with this vibration. And the more graciously, the more openly. Now here's the other part of it. The more relaxed you are. See, I was once invited by an Episcopal priest, two Episcopal priests, friends of mine. They were having a retreat for other priests. This was again many years ago when I was less experienced, and they thought I would be a red-hot guest speaker, so they had me come to their retreat. I had very little experience. I grew up Jewish, and I did not grow up in much religion, so I really had very little experience with clergymen or priests or anything like that. So we were there the first day, and all the priests knew each other. There was only one woman. Now there would be a lot of women, but there was only one woman and me, and then all the rest were men. And they're all joking with each other, and everybody's having a good time. Then it's time to say the blessing over the food, and everybody's a clergy person, so like who's going to do the blessing? There's lots of joking back and forth about who's going to do it, and finally Walter or someone was designated. So Walter, we were just having fun, and then Walter starts praying, "Beloved Jesus," like this. I thought we were still joking. I began to laugh. Whoa, that was bad. Everybody looks over at me, and just in a horrible moment, I realized that this is not a joke. You know, we had been talking to each other, but now we're talking to Jesus. And therefore, we need to become somebody that we would never imagine being with each other, because for some reason we think this is what Jesus wants of us. So I began to cover my laugh with a cough and realized this was going to be a very long retreat. After that, my friend said to me later, I looked the whole time like I didn't actually speak, that the language I was speaking was not my native language, and that everything that was said to me I had to translate through this whole system and then try to bring it out, which was 100% exactly what I was doing. I didn't understand that people could think of spirituality as something they put on. I had only ever understood it as the apple seed becoming an apple tree. And I just was so confused even by the very idea that you would put it on. How could your spirituality be made out of anything except what you are? And so, beloved Jesus is not pleased because he just wants you to be himself, because who else are you going to be? It just doesn't work. And here's the sneaky part. The divine lives within you and he knows you better than yourself, and he's not fooled. You know, this whole pious, this is who I am, this is what I'm supposed to think, this is the face I'm going to show you stuff, it's a total waste of time. I actually did that with Kriyananda. At a certain point, I put on this face with him for a couple of years. I was working in this business, and I was so incompetent, I didn't know how to get help, and he was trying to teach me something. He just kept increasing the pressure, and I kept trying to be good until I just kind of cracked. And then he said, "You never fooled me." And I thought to myself, what a waste of time. What a complete waste of time. And it taught me a lot. You know, you have to be completely authentic, because you're an apple seed becoming an apple tree. And if you're going to pretend to be something you're not, all that's going to happen really literally is that God or your higher self or your guru is just going to wait till you're ready to be authentic. Because imagine any friendship that you have. If you're just putting on a face, how can people really befriend you? And when you finally crack, that's when your friendship really starts, isn't it? Save yourself time. There's a great Christian mystic named Frank Laubach. He's off the planet. He wrote a book called Letters from a Modern Mystic. And he was a missionary. He was a missionary to the Philippines. He was supposed to get there and save their souls with Jesus. And he got there and kind of figured out that their souls didn't need saving. And so he used the time to become very, very deep in his own spiritual practice. And he wrote these letters. It's beautiful. Friend of mine, the parents of friends of mine who were also missionaries, went to a session where he was training them. And they asked him to pray. And they said his prayers were the most unusual prayers they had ever heard. And this is how they described it. They felt that he was in a constant conversation with the divine within him, and when he was asked to pray, he simply made audible for a time his inner conversation, spoke it out loud, and then stopped, and then went back inside. Now that's what we're really doing. This is a relationship. This is a relationship with our higher reality, with the vibration that we're trying to be. And if we approach it like that, you see, it's totally fun. Because there's nothing you can't do. You're in a terrible mood, you present that terrible mood. Okay, Lord, this is going to be a god-awful meditation, because everything is really lousy today. And this is just all I have to bring you. This is who I am. And today looks really promising. Let's see what we can make work today. But it's the only way that you'll ever become an apple tree is just to be yourself. And the sooner we understand that what we're doing when we're meditating is we're in the company of the Comforter, the more quickly that will become our reality. Okay? We're going to do a chant, have just a few minutes of silence, and then that'll be our day. Okay?